Hello and welcome to In Focus. I'm your host Ridhima Shukla, and in this episode we will shine the spotlight on Africa and the world's current biggest challenge, the novel coronavirus pandemic and its impact on health systems, along with Africa's race to achieving universal healthcare coverage, which was also the focus of AMREF's biennial Africa Health Agenda International Conference of 2021. To kick off an in-depth analysis of these two subjects, we spoke to the Group CEO of AMREF Health Africa, Dr. Gitahi, who pointed out the glaring gaps in the healthcare systems and the state of UHC in the continent.
The pandemic itself, across the continent of Africa where we work, has seen both positive and negative impact on the health system. For one, it has seen on a negative side, it has actually seen lower access to services. We've seen women and girls seek less and less services because of the fear of health facilities and maybe the fear of getting infected. And this is going to have a negative effect on the health system, because we are probably going to see increasing teenage pregnancies, increasing maternal mortality, and we are also going to see that preventable diseases that have relied on adequate immunization programs in the countries, and these have been disrupted by the pandemic because either health workers were distracted or people did not take their children for immunization. And this obviously is going to affect negatively our achievements on access to health services. We're going to see more people sick, and we are going to also see increasing mortality as well. We saw that at the beginning of the pandemic, we had very few ICU beds or intensive care beds or high dependency unit beds. We saw very little access to oxygen, which is a key commodity, not only for COVID, but it's a key commodity for other conditions like pneumonia for children and others. And we've seen that ramped up. We've seen increased capacity for laboratory access. As we build capacity for diagnosis of COVID, there was a lot of training of laboratory technicians, building physical infrastructure for laboratories, which wasn't there before. So all these are positive, and they're going to remain in the health system for long, and will definitely play a positive role in the achievement of UHC. Universal health coverage is all about financial protection to access to health services. Now, financial protection requires more investment by government into health financing, and this increased financing for health needs to come from tax collection. We've seen governments get into economic recession, and what we are worried about, what is going to be the impact of this reduced economic growth and indeed economic recession on the available money to invest into health. So governments are best advised that even in a recession, do not deprioritize health, actually increase health investments so that you can protect your economy now and in the future.
What would you consider is the state of universal healthcare right now in Africa? Are there any countries that are getting closer to the goal? And if so, what are they doing differently?
It's a mixed picture, I must say, that we have countries that trailblazers that have started efforts. Of course, if you are to look at Africa, we tend to look at North Africa as a very different construct from Sub-Saharan Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we have seen countries like Ghana, Kenya, Senegal, South Africa take clear, critical steps to achieving universal health coverage. These steps include, one, legislation of universal health coverage to ensure that it is embedded in law. Secondly, political will, declarations at the highest political level to say that it is a strategic country goal, socio-economic goal. Third, ensuring that there is a process of pooling resources. We are going to actually be releasing a report of the High Commission on the state of UHC in Africa, which is also going to go beyond just the counting the numbers to community voices, to actually hearing more stories from the people who are actually supposed to be beneficiaries of UHC, and making accountability not just quantitative, but qualitative as well.
Next in line to offer expert opinion on a newly founded Independent Health Commission, we have Professor Edwin Barasa, the co-chairman of AHAIC Commission.
Commission on the state of UHC in Africa was essentially set up to take stock on the progress that African countries have made with regard to universal health coverage, to identify some of the challenges and opportunities that the continent is facing, and also make recommendations on what African governments can do to accelerate progress towards universal health. But African countries have made some progress. African countries have made a commitment to extend access to services and have made some progress, but gaps still exist, as you rightly pointed out. And the reason that we have these gaps is because of a myriad of challenges. And these challenges can essentially be looked at as challenges emanating from the broader context of African countries and the continent, and health system, health sector specific issues.
You talked about the investment landscape, but can you tell me exactly what is it like to invest in the African healthcare system? Why don't we see a lot of investments going into this sector, and why don't we see a lot of private sector players going into this space?
The share of government spending on health has to be at least 5% of country GDPs. But what we see is that on average, African countries spend only about half of that, so about 2% of that. And that's an average. So you have countries that spend way below 1% of their GDP. So clearly there is very little investment in the health sector. COVID is a very good example. It's demonstrated to us that investing in health, or rather what happens with the health of the people in a country, affects their economy. We know that the COVID pandemic has, for instance, resulted in a contraction of between 2 to 5% of African economies. So that, if there's anything that we should learn from that, is that investing in health protects our economies, but it also provides the human capital that's required to increase productivity. Other than constrained economies, one of the reasons is that, as I mentioned earlier, it seems that African countries do not prioritize the health sector. And one of the things that has, one of the factors that explains this is the fact that people, governments still view the health sector as a cost center rather than an investment center.
Dr. Wan Zhao, a technical advisor to AHAIC Commission, shared with us the challenges faced across sectors of health and solutions to remedy the problems.
I think one would be verticalization of healthcare, just because of the nature of the development of healthcare, such as, the MDGs. There's been a verticalization of healthcare in the region, of trying to approach it on a disease by disease basis, and that has really not worked towards UHC, which requires a more system-based care. So that would be one of the challenges that certainly exists for UHC in health in Africa. I think also a health workforce. So one is not having a health workforce, which a lot of people talk about, and the statistics are not great. And when you talk about health workforce, I think it's across the health workforce, not only physicians and nurses, but also community health workers, social workers, people, lab technologists, across the whole myriad of health workers, just not having health workers, but also not matching the health workers in the region to what is required for the region. A good example is the lab technologists. If there are not enough lab technologists, then the doctors and the nurses, etc., can't run those investigations. Another one is just having health systems that are legacy systems and not reinventing systems to match our needs. So a lot of the health systems we have historically in the region were based on the legacy systems that were carried on when countries gained independence. And there hasn't been a reinventing, so to speak, of those systems, really bottom up and putting them like completely as new systems, just to ensure that they're reaching the needs of the people.
Apart from what you just mentioned, which I suppose are going to be part of the report that you're going to launch at the conference, what else does the report say about universal healthcare?
We talk about challenges because I think it's important to recognize those challenges, but then we look forward and look more positively at opportunities. So what is it that exists in the region that is an opportunity to enable universal health coverage? And some of those opportunities include issues like having a young population. It's an opportunity because there's a way that healthcare can be crafted for that demographic that is still yet healthy. We also talk about the opportunity of regional collaboration. There's an opportunity to manufacture some of the things required to provide healthcare. And so some of that opportunity can be used actually to diversify the economy and to have manufacturing of our own health goods in the region. Look at both the challenges and the opportunities, and we make some recommendations. Specifically about our recommendations overall is they really aim to be Africa specific. So there can be recommendations for universal health coverage for all parts of the globe and all parts of different regions of the world. But the Commission really aims to have tailor-made recommendations that are Africa-specific and that speak to different audiences, all the way from policymakers to other decision makers and also citizens, because they are a good and important agency in achieving universal health coverage in Africa.
Leveraging technology, data and communication. Mahasere Keita, Director of Programs, African Society for Laboratory Medicine, talked about the first of its kind online policy tool that offers an overview of the status of healthcare across countries of Africa, called the Sustainability Index.
It identifies some of the key drivers that affect the capacity of health systems to cope with system-level strain and ensure that they are resilient in the face of major challenges. So in order to develop the index, the program included a panel of healthcare experts from Africa, and we oversaw the design of the index and guided the process to ensure that the focus areas were on current and future health interests.
How sustainable is healthcare in Africa?
At the moment, it's a little bit difficult to say that the healthcare systems are sustainable in Africa because we're dealing with countries and regions that are typically resource poor. The healthcare facilities are often lacking in equipment and in human capacity. In terms of being able to reach out to communities, we have an issue with access to healthcare services for many communities and many locals.
But when you look at the region, for instance, where do we see most of these challenges more than other regions?
The areas that are the most challenged on the continent typically are Central and Western Africa. The regions that are doing relatively better are the Northern African and Southern African regions, as well as East Africa.
When you look at the region, for instance, where do we see most of these challenges more than other regions?
The areas that are the most challenged on the continent typically are Central and Western Africa. The regions that are doing relatively better are the Northern African and Southern African regions, as well as East Africa. Some of the lessons learned from these pandemics, we've learned that sensitization and communication campaigns fully adapted to the local context are critical. We've learned that prevention is much better than treatment. We need to really work on the area of prevention and ensure that the disease is controlled and doesn't spread wide, because treatment is an issue. Our health facilities are strained when the pandemic becomes out of control. And then we learned that contact tracing is an essential intervention during pandemics. So to be able to trace the contacts of those who have the disease.
A pregnant woman or a newborn die somewhere in the world every 11 seconds. Helga Folkestad, Executive Director, the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, talks about the need and urgency of bringing the voices of women and children to the fore when reforming, restructuring and reinventing healthcare.
So it's important so we know from before that women and adolescents and children are really vulnerable, and especially become even increasingly vulnerable when something as serious as a pandemic hits. But it's really important to hear from women themselves and to really share their story and their experiences. And so this report is about, getting their voices to the forefront, bringing together and being informed by lived experiences of about approximately 30,000 women and adolescents in 43 countries in Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, and India. And so to hear what are they experiencing and why and what can we do about it? So the report is 5 of our really lead partners, AMREF, Grâce à Machel Trust, the IPPF, the Pro Familia, the Center for Catalyzing Change, coming together and really trying to bring the voices of women to the front so that becomes a real reality.
What are some of these grave inequalities that we have seen, especially due to the pandemic?
Just to say a little bit, I mean, what they're reporting, challenges that they're reporting are impacts on mental health and well-being, to disruption of life, limits on access to education, food insecurity, loss of livelihood, lack of access to health information and services, information and limitations around sexual and reproductive health and rights, and then really increasing violence and lack of safety and reduce agencies in securing for safety. I just want to share with you, Julius, that some of the statistics here are really stark, because it's not only women, but it's inequities are being further compounded by the impact of COVID, and whose knock-on effect on women, children, and adolescents have been far greater than the direct effects. And as you can, as we see from the report, they cut across social and political and economic spheres. Now, the World Bank forecasted a 5.2% contraction in GDP, and the UN has estimated that 71 million people are being pushed back into poverty. And so services are really, it's not that they're not there, but they're not being accessed because of the pandemic. Women have had decreased access to reproductive health services because of disruptions, and reported of domestic violence has increased. So really, this is it makes the reality of this, it brings really a face to the problems at hand.
Talk to me about the key recommendations from the report, and what exactly are you trying to achieve here?
So it's important to safeguard women and children and adolescents, right? Because they're vulnerable, they're not accessing. So solutions being implemented that we have learned from and can apply are: one, economic relief measures. Women are losing their job. They're actually making decisions based on the situation of their economy. So the economic relief measures are important. They need to be targeted. Inclusion of sexual, reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, adolescent health, and also nutritional services in a list of essential services. So to be explicit about these services and provide them, Julius, that's important. And then using a range of digital tools and traditional media to maintain health and social and educational services and reach different population groups with health messages, and also psychosocial support.
With the youngest population in the world, Africa could not achieve universal healthcare coverage without taking into account the expectations and experiences of the youth. To talk on this matter, we were joined by Evelyn Carijo, Director, Youth in Action, AMREF.
WAAC's Youth in Action is a fully youth-led, youth-driven initiative. It began as a really brilliant idea where we said we want to make sure that young people have a voice and are really able to contribute to meaningful youth engagement within the gender equality and sexual and reproductive health space. So WAAC's Youth in Action has been active for the last 3 years. We are focusing on 3 key pillars. One, ensuring that we provide young people with a common voice when it comes to their advocacy priorities. 2, ensuring that we equip them with capacity strengthening, specifically focusing on advocacy strategy, monitoring, evaluation and learning, and organizational development. And thirdly, ensuring that young people have the right space and really able to participate and contribute to policy processes. So WIACT Youth in Action ensures that young people have a voice and are able to participate in policy processes. WIACT has over the last few years also hosted the Youth for UHC movement, which is the very first Pan-African movement of young people advancing UHC in Africa.
Excellent. So when you speak about capacity building in terms of getting the youth involved when it comes to policy, what are these areas where you're looking to reform policy with the help of youth? I read it was about gender inequality and sexual and reproductive health.
One thing we've ensured within WIACT Youth in Action is making sure that young people are at the center of designing the interventions that we have as an initiative and as a program. So it's not us who really dictate what we do at WIACT. We make sure that the youth priorities and that young people are really driving the agenda of WIACT. And so even when we're designing WIACT, we had to get young people to really speak to the needs and their priorities within not just Kenya, but also looking at regionally and globally. And what we heard from the youth is that, of course, they're disproportionately affected when it comes to quite a number of issues. If you look at HIV, for example, adolescents and youth have higher incidences when it comes to adult infections. If you look at issues such as teenage pregnancies, quite rampant here in Kenya and beyond, where we're talking about 1 in every 3 girls getting pregnant by the age of 18, and many other challenges that young people face. And so the youth said they want to participate in solving these challenges, but then they're not able to do that if they can't inform and influence policies. And so for us, we're looking at equipping young people with these advocacy skills to influence policies, and then as a result, have this ripple effect where the health priorities of young people are addressed, and to ensure that young people now have access to quality healthcare services, not just around sexual and reproductive health, but really broadly, ensuring that we end sexual and gender-based violence and ensuring that young people are able to live a productive life.
Could you give us an example of how a youth body has been actually able to impact policy building, whether anywhere in Africa?
Oh, we have so many examples, but I'll start with here in Kenya, where I have seen the power of young people coming together to really influence policies. I have seen in regions such as Nairobi, which is the capital, the youth for the first time influenced the very first adolescent sexual and reproductive health policy within Nairobi County. In other regions, such as the pastoral regions in Kenya, we've seen young people advocating for the first anti-bidding policy within that region, because anti-bidding is a retrogressive practice that really affects young people, and which then makes young people get married off at an early age. We've seen young people in other regions, such as Kilifi in the coastal region, being able to advocate for gender policies. Beyond Kenya, we have seen young people influencing policies even at the AU level.
With the burst of social media and the availability of unregulated content, misinformation poses a great threat to the sanctity of various sectors, especially in healthcare. To learn about ways of combating misinformation, we spoke to Elizabeth Tonjira, Global Communication Director, AMREF.
Misinformation and disinformation pose a huge health risk to a lot of people who consume this false information. And the difference between misinformation and disinformation is that misinformation is false or inaccurate information that is spread or published, and disinformation is put out with a clear intent to deceive the people who are consuming that particular type of messaging.
Look at 2020, especially when the pandemic hit, the narrative changed to something called infodemic. Why did we see the proliferation in a period where people really desperately needed information?
Now, because a lot more people have access to smartphones, have access to the internet. Right now, people can readily share their unsolicited advice and information through various channels, through various mediums, without any control. I think that's why it has peaked over 2019 and 2020. We've seen a lot of falsified information, and it has created an infodemic. And there's nothing as worse as the fear of the unknown, because it's a pandemic that people are yet to really substantiate and get and investigate further into what you can do, what you cannot do.
How do we go about making sure that people get the right information through these platforms? Is it the problem of awareness, or do we have to legislate it? What do we need to do?
First, we need policy changes to ban or limit the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of conversations around Facebook, around Twitter, around YouTube, around the various social media platforms that people use to spread this information, whether accurate or inaccurate. We've seen more and more parliamentarians come out and say we need a way or a mechanism to control the type of information that is consumed by the public. Number two, we need a lot more collaboration between the social media institutions or platforms with health organizations. So to give you a very good example is the partnership that we have with Twitter. During the late last year, we got into a partnership where Twitter is helping journalists filter and decipher fake news and the real news. I think partnerships like those really help, and we've seen Twitter very actively involved in ensuring that before anybody retweets any information, if it's an article, before you retweet, you will see the message asking you, have you read, would you like to read this first before sharing it out? So we've seen some organizations be intentional about the kind of information that they're putting out. The third tranche of what we need to do is create platforms for health experts to really give people this needed information. And social media is just one of the channels. We have community radios, which would serve a lot of communities in rural Africa. We have the TV, we have using different agents, communication agents in various institutions, and using community health workers.
We cannot end this conversation without talking about the role of traditional media, which you kind of touched on, whether community radios or TV stations. I think the debate has been about whether these traditional media still have credibility, especially with a lot of political tensions that we're seeing across. What relevance do you see that these platforms still have?
Traditional media has an imperative role to play. They set the agenda in a lot of the things that we talk about, we resonate with, and so their role cannot be, ignored. What I think most editors and, media stations need to do is, when somebody says they're a health expert, let's go the extra mile of finding out what credentials do they have, what is the agenda behind them sharing this information. So this is very vital and critical. And one of the things as an organization, AMREF, we've been creating a speaker bureau where we media train all our health experts on different topical issues, and have created a platform where it's really where media stations, traditional media, can easily be able to reach this particular health experts who have the credentials, who have experience, who are working within those settings to give this very needed and vital information about health.
Africa hopes to achieve universal healthcare coverage by 2030, and the deliberation of critical issues, tailored solutions, and a strong call to action for leaders across all dimensions covers only the beginning of this massive undertaking, yet marks the commitment made by the world's most central continent. Thank you for watching.